Shortly after the ambush on Ferrix, we're treated with a montage of sullen and stoic-looking townsfolk. Marvel looks broke and her boy Andor is wanted for murder, and he's gonna be on the run. For good, it looks like this time. Poor Brix is mourning the death of Simple Tim, and Brasso, well, he's pounding back a few brews because he accidentally tied a Corpo tac pod to a massive piece of salvage, and well, now he's got blood on his hands. The residents of Ferrix crossed the line.
We're sorry.
And now the Imperial Security Bureau has set up shop on the planet, but perhaps what's more interesting is the fact that the Imps are going to be bringing with them some clone troopers wearing Phase 2 armor to fill out the rest of their garrison. Which brings up so many questions. I mean, why are the Imps bringing in clone troopers this late in the game? On our other channel, Generation Shorts, we recently broke down how old the clone troopers would be in 5 BBY, which is important because the Kaminoans altered their DNA so that they age twice as fast physically as a normal human being. The first generation of clone troopers were secretly ordered by Jedi Master Sifo Dyas.
I have come for your help.
And began production in 32 BBY. And the last generation of clones came off the assembly line in 19 BBY. And so by 5 BBY, that means the clones were anywhere from 27 years old to 14 years old. Times that by 2, and then we have a physical age of around 54 to 28 years old. Now, having a large unit of 40 to 50-year-old soldiers in your military is stretching things a little bit. It's also stretching the armor they're wearing and also the insulation suits, because after, I guess, your mid-30s, you start getting a little sideways. But then on the lower end of the scale, you have clones who are in their late 20s and early 30s. They're much closer to your physical peak in life and also probably much wiser and have a lot more combat experience than a fresh-faced teenager straight out of the academy. This makes these clones actually pretty ideal for being soldiers. Before we continue though, a quick word from our sponsor for today's video, lightsaber.com. I really like that ignition. Anyway, they're the premier manufacturer of lightsabers. After the Imperial Remnant basically defaced the Jedi's holy kyber crystal planet of Illum and turned it into a super weapon. lightsaber.com has a great deal for you guys today. If you buy 2 lightsabers, they're gonna knock up $100 off that final price. Make sure you use the promo code OCT100F at checkout. Why not treat yourself to one of these awesome Obi-Wan Kenobi replicas known as the First Dawn? Ever since the Dolphins broke through the retaining wall, I don't go to the outhouse without one of these things. Plus, if you haven't visited lightsaber.com recently, check them out. They got a lot of new products with really competitive new prices. For more information, check out the link down below. Thank you for your patience. On to the rest of the video. So why is it so shocking to see clone troopers in Andor? Well, Star Wars lore generally states that after the rise of the New Order, the clone troopers were pretty much decommissioned and phased out of active military use. Aside from some ongoing Outer Rim siege battlefronts, once the last Separatist holdouts were taken out and destroyed, it was always believed that the clones, at least at the unit level, were disbanded. There definitely shouldn't be many clones left in the Empire by 5 BBY, which is 14 years after the war ends. This is a period of time where the Galactic Empire no longer needed a state-of-the-art conventional army. What it needed instead was a more flexible and massive peacekeeping force that could deal with political dissent and insurgencies. On top of that, as we see in Andor, the Empire was keen on removing even local planetary defense forces. When the corporate authority on Preox Morlana proved to be incapable of keeping the peace in its sector, the ISB supervisor in charge of the region took complete control of security from pre-Mor enforcement. And so the Empire was not only in charge of stabilizing the entire galaxy, they were also slowly removing independent sector and planetary defense forces that were usually locally funded. It's actually really stupid to do this if you think about it. It adds a lot more strain to the military defense budget. As incompetent as the Preox Morlana authority was, it cost the Empire almost nothing to keep that part of the galaxy relatively stable.
Haven't seen any blues in a while. What the hell are they doing?
Or at least stable enough so that the chaos in their sector doesn't spread to another area. Even with Deputy Inspector Karn's incursion increasing tension on the planet, the mistakes that his small force made on the planet will not be raising chaos nearly close to the level that the ISB presence on the planet will. And that's because the Empire had a really unhealthy habit of trying to enforce its will on everyone about everything. I mean, it's gonna cost them a lot of money in the long run. Which is where Vice Admiral Rampart, and of course the individual responsible for almost every major terrible policy decision made by the Empire, Wilhuff Tarkin, comes into play. Emperor Palpatine for some reason saw Wilhuff Tarkin as a problem solver, although clearly he was a problem maker. Together, Tarkin and Rampart would be responsible for coming up with Project Warmantle, aka the replacement program for the clone army. The stated objective of this program was to establish a training pipeline for a new type of military force based mainly on conscripts and volunteers. War Mantle's original strategy was to use cloned commandos who were trained specifically in foreign internal defense, aka training allied insurgents on how to be effective fighters, to train the bulk of this new volunteer and conscript army. In the early stages of this program, the Kaminoans were still included in the discussion. Prime Minister Lamassu argued that
conscripted recruits will never reach the same level of military proficiency. Our clones have been trained since their creation.
The Prime Minister is correct, the clones were amazing. But since there was no war to be fought at this point and the enemies of the Empire were in hiding and slowly building up their strength again, having dozens of legions of the finest infantry in the galaxy was kind of a stupid thing to do. It was also stupid expensive. Furthermore, unlike conscripts and volunteers, whose first 18 years of life are subsidized by the caring mothers and fathers of the Empire, these clones were literally grown in a tube and the federal government had to pay for everything, from lessons and food to haircuts and leisure time. Even with their sped up aging, it still took around 9 to 10 years to completely train a clone trooper and raise them. I mean, the cost was just astronomical. It didn't make any sense. And, Moff Wilhelm Tarkin actually understood this.
Clone troopers will be needed to maintain order throughout the galaxy.
Indeed, a service conscription soldiers could provide at half the cost.
Interestingly enough, though, Vice Admiral Rampart misses the entire point of the program and instead chooses to believe
the loyalty of those who willingly enlist is what I see tremendous value in.
Yeah, he's really idealistic. Wait until he sees all of the rampant corruption and shenanigans those loyal individuals who willingly enlist will create. The clones were by far much more loyal to the Empire, especially once the control chips in their brains were switched on. There does seem to be a big difference, though, between the latter batches of clones versus the first batch of clones. I'm not sure if the latter batches were genetically altered to become even more obedient. That was sort of a thing in Legends with the Spartai clones. But there is one thing for sure, the latter batches probably didn't have a Jedi or Mandalorian trainer to teach them how to be more individualistic and therefore more dangerous to an authoritarian government. And so, once again, everything points towards these clone troopers, especially the latter batch, as being ideal for the Galactic Empire military. I mean, they're even paid for by another government, and I'm pretty sure the debt that the Republic had did not carry over.
Our contracts stipulate the continued production.
Your contracts were with the Republic, which no longer exists.
And so, what happens to these other clones then? Well, we see that at the end of the Clone Wars, most clones were moved out of combat zones and placed on administrative or logistical duties. This usually involved doing boring things like guarding old Republic and Separatist stockpiles or former Jedi bases. Other units were assigned to garrisons in the Outer Rim, specifically on former Separatist worlds. These clone units would gradually suffer losses and become smaller and smaller. While it's unlikely that these clones got involved in too much heavy or attritional combat, they also didn't have any new replenishments. It is possible that replacement conscript or volunteer soldiers did join their ranks, but then again, because of the culture of the clones, it wouldn't really be easy for those individuals to fit in, I think. What's more likely is that understrength clone units would just be combined together. Meanwhile, as the TK troopers began to grow in size, entire legions would be trained and eventually would evolve into the Stormtrooper legions that we all know and love. Contrary to popular belief, these Stormtroopers were not the common infantry soldier used by the Empire. They're actually a specialized infantry-focused military branch that functioned within the larger Imperial Army structure and also were commonly deployed with the Imperial Navy. It's a bit confusing, I know, but think of them as kind of like the Marine Corps. They have their own separate command chain, but they depend heavily on other branches of the military for, vehicles and transport. The Stormtroopers were also selected for their fanatic beliefs in the New Order and Emperor Palpatine. When the Empire finally collapsed and the Imperial soldiers and officers were surrendering en masse to the rebellion, these guys were infiltrating New Republic filtration centers for prisoners and then blowing themselves up. They were also gleefully participating in Operation Cinder. A lot of Star Wars content, especially the animated stuff, features Stormtroopers heavily to the point where it seems like they're the only ones protecting the Empire. I think this is so they don't have to animate faces, they could just put helmets on everyone. It makes things a lot easier and cheaper. But the truth was, both the Imperial Army and the Imperial Navy troopers, and also these ISB troopers we see in Andor, made up a much larger portion of the entire Imperial military. They just weren't posted in the most glorious places, so we don't hear about them that often. Until Andor, of course.
Aldani, sir. It's not many people's first choice assignment.
What I really love about Andor, and why I think a lot of people think it's kind of boring, is the fact that it's trying to be as realistic as possible. And so far, we've seen some ISB officers, and we've seen some Imperial Army officers, and almost no stormtroopers. This reflects the reality of the Imperial military force. Stormtroopers were special units. They were designed to shock and awe people. They were the vanguard of offensives. You're not really supposed to find them in random areas in the Outer Rim, in garrisons, unless they are in an active military operation. I also really like the fact that ANDOR is bringing these clone troopers back into these Outer Rim territories. If you really think about it logically, which this show is all about, you know, logic and practical kind of stuff, it makes sense that the Empire would keep these clones around. I mean, it'd be a waste to not use them. Clones don't really care so much where they're deployed. They don't have family that they have to visit. All they're really looking for is purpose and to serve. I mean, the saddest thing I remember seeing in the Kenobi series was that one old clone trooper who was just sitting there and asking for change. I mean, to neglect such a useful military tool and to leave them like that, it's just a complete waste of resources and money. I mean, this was the greatest fear that most clones had when it was announced that the cloning program was going to end. They didn't know what they were going to do post-military. It's not like they had marketable skills other than killing people, and they didn't have people on the outside that they could link up with. They were slaves to the Republic when they were born, but by the time they were adults, they had become dependent on the very system that trapped them. Their story is one of the greatest tragedies in Star Wars. They're one of the few groups that are truly innocent in this great drama in the stars. And finally, in ANDOR, we might catch a glimpse of them one last time serving together with their brothers. Now, Tony Gilroy admits to not being a huge Star Wars fan, but I'm pretty sure he's done his work and his research here, I'm hoping, and he's understood what the clone troopers represent, not only to the fan base, but to the wider galaxy. Because honestly, the fact that he doesn't really care about the fans or about Star Wars has been a blessing for us. I mean, let's be honest, Andor is clearly the superior TV show. You can make the argument that The Mandalorian is better, but they're really just like not comparable. They're different. The Mandalorian is a serial, you know, it's designed for shorter watching, whereas Andor is truly one gigantic epic. Anyway, guys, let me know in the comment section below what you think about my assessment about why the clone troopers are going to be on Ferrix. Also, don't forget to subscribe and hit that notification button down below so you don't miss out on the rest of our awesome content. As usual, my name is Alan, reminding you that my allegiance is to the Republic, to democracy.